Russia-Ukraine news. A mathematician is once again an outsider in his own country of Russia, 66 years after his homecoming. Famous mathematician Alexei Sosinsky saw his family's past repeated when President Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, exactly a century after his parents fled Russia to avoid the Bolsheviks. Sosinsky was born in France and raised in the United States before returning to the country of his parents' birth in 1957. However, he is now again in exile at the age of 85. Putin fled in the middle of the night with 2 luggage last year when he started the war. "I had no hesitation, I immediately did whatever was possible to get out," Sosinsky said to Reuters in a phone conversation. A former pupil helped him get a plane ticket to Istanbul, from where he flew to France to visit his daughter, who was living there at the time. His father had escaped to Istanbul in 1919. Trilingual and still teaching kids in Russia via Zoom, he plans to spend the rest of his life abroad. Peace and war. The history of Sosinsky's family, which he relates with great pride and meticulous detail, is a microcosm of the history of upheaval, conflict, and repression in Russia spanning over a century. Ariadna Chernova, his mother, was the daughter of Viktor Chernov, a socialist revolutionary who briefly led Russia's Constituent Assembly in 1918 before the Bolsheviks disbanded it. In 1923, she and her mother and sisters left Russia. She met and married fellow Russian exile Bronislav Sosinsky in France. He had served in the White Army against the Bolsheviks during the Russian Civil War and received the highest award for valor. Alexei was a French baby, born in 1937. His father was a resistance fighter during World War II and a prisoner of the Nazis. In 1948, the family relocated to New York so that Bronislav could begin work for the United Nations. Alexei's first exposure to Russia was during a family vacation in the mid-1950s, after Stalin's death. Even in Moscow, he found the absolutely horrendous level of life shocking. And so, against all logic, in 1957 he opted to remain in Moscow and pursue a degree in mathematics, a field in which he considered Moscow to be the center of the whole world. In the early 1970s, he had already achieved international renown as an associate professor of knot theory at Moscow State University. After he and a friend defended exiled dissident writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn in a 1974 letter, his career took a nosedive. The letter, intended for a French literary magazine, was seen by the KGB and cost the friend his job. Sosinsky was required to sign up for Marxism-Leninism classes, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He explained that he had resigned from the department after tearing up the original resignation letter and writing it on a blank piece of paper. Before he could go back to school, he spent 13 years as an editor at a scientific publication. "It's a hideous regime." This man has been vocal for decades. Putin's intelligence, cleverness, total immorality and cruelty, as well as his capacity to adapt to sanctions and his skill in utilizing state media to hypnotize the populace, have been fatally underappreciated by the West, he claims. Sosinsky remarked, "It is absolutely horrible that normal, everyday people support this hideous regime." He said that Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is a hero who is doing a fantastic job, despite some missteps. Sosinsky has expressed a desire to pass away in his nation of birth, France. And he has no illusions that the fighting in Ukraine will end by then. Since he was pretty sure the conflict would not end in his lifetime, he was extremely negative. To paraphrase Winston Churchill, this is the kind of war that nobody is ever going to win. However, after so many years in exile, Sosinsky is still restless. He mentioned contemplating a short trip back to meet old acquaintances and check up on the rural property outside of Moscow where he used to go skiing in the winter and swimming in the summer. Despite his reservations, he expressed a desire to return to Russia for the summer in the future. "Surprisingly, my hope is that at some time I will overcome my fear of repression and go back to Russia for the summer," he said. My daughter is very freaked out about my going back to Russia and being imprisoned or worse. Therefore, it is my responsibility to reassure her.